It all started so quietly, too quietly, as if peace had wrapped around me like a warm blanket, lulling me into a false sense of security. My life with Cassie seemed stable, normal, even. But stability and normality can be deceiving, can't they? Behind closed doors, sometimes things fester, decay, and rot without you even noticing. Cassie was everything I thought I wanted in a wife. We met through mutual friends at some tedious work event. I worked in IT, she was in marketing, and after a few polite exchanges and half-hearted jokes, we realized we had something. I won't say it was love at first sight. No, love doesn't hit you like a lightning bolt. It's more like a slow burn, or at least that's what I told myself at the time. She had these captivating brown eyes, like pools of chocolate that seemed warm and inviting. That was one of the things I first noticed about her. And her smile, that subtle curve of her lips, the way it made you feel like you were the only person in the room. I remember the butterflies, the excitement, the thrill of something new. She was sharp, ambitious, but kind, or so I believed. Together, we climbed the corporate ladder, spending late nights working on our individual projects and even later nights talking about the future we would build together. But you know how life gets? It's not the grand moments that define a marriage. It's the day-to-day. Somewhere between the dinner parties and Netflix nights, the mundane crept in. You don't notice it at first, of course. The conversations that used to light up your world suddenly become routine, dull even. We used to laugh, God, we used to laugh so much. Then one day, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I made her laugh. When had that stopped? Cassie, she didn't show any obvious signs of discontent. At least, not at first. We were both busy with work, and we always had something to talk about: a new project at the office, a new series we wanted to watch. It was easy to dismiss the small things, the way she started coming home later and later, the way her phone was always upside down, notifications silenced, how she'd avoid eye contact more often than usual, brushing off intimate conversations with vague excuses about stress and deadlines. Suspicion. It's funny. You hear the stories, you read the articles, but you never think it'll happen to you. You convince yourself you're being paranoid, overthinking. After all, we were still having sex, still having date nights. There were no obvious fights, no big red flags. Or maybe I was just blind to the ones that were waving right in front of my face. There was one night, this was months ago. Now when she came home from drinks with the girls, her hair slightly disheveled, that smile of hers a little too forced. Her lipstick was slightly smeared, as if she'd wiped it off in a hurry. She gave me a quick peck on the cheek, her breath smelling faintly of gin. I asked her how the night was. She hesitated just for a moment before rattling off the names of her supposed companions, none of whom I recognized. Something about the way she spoke made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, but I brushed it off. That's what you do, right? You trust your spouse. You ignore the small, nagging doubts because the alternative is terrifying. Then there was the time I found a second phone in her bag. That one really threw me. Cassie, always so meticulous and organized, accidentally left it out one morning when she rushed off to work. I wasn't snooping, I just saw it there, wedged between her wallet and a packet of gum. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. It was sleek, newer than the one she usually carried. I almost texted her, told her she left it behind, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the realization that she never mentioned having a second phone. Who the hell needs two phones? It seemed odd. When I asked her about it that evening, she waved it off, said it was for work. You know how demanding my clients can be, she said, with that same smile she'd used 1,000 times before to disarm me. I accepted her explanation at face value because, again, what else was I going to do? Accuse her of lying? No, that wasn't me, at least not back then. But those small moments kept adding up. The way she started dressing up more than usual for work, even on days when I knew she had no meetings. The gym membership she suddenly became obsessed with. Sure, people go through phases, but this one felt different. It felt like she was trying too hard to become someone else. There was even this one time, a Saturday afternoon, when she claimed she was heading to the mall. A few hours later, I happened to drive past one of those fancy boutique hotels downtown on my way to meet a friend. As I waited at a red light, I swear I saw her Cassie walking out of the hotel lobby, laughing with some guy in a crisp suit. It was just a glimpse, barely long enough to be sure. By the time I processed what I saw, the light turned green and traffic carried me away. I convinced myself I'd imagined it, but now I'm not so sure. You think you know someone, right? You think you know every quirk, every habit, every corner of their soul. But maybe you don't. Maybe people are better at hiding than we give them credit for. The first real crack in the facade came one weekend when I was cleaning out the attic. Cassie was out, probably at yoga or brunch or whatever excuse she had that day, and I decided to tackle the clutter. Among the piles of old holiday decorations and dusty photo albums, I found a box I didn't recognize. It wasn't labeled, just shoved in the corner as if it had been hidden on purpose. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside, there were DVDs, several of them, all neatly organized in jewel cases. No titles, no labels, just plain, blank discs. The box sat in my lap, my hands trembling slightly as I pulled out one of the DVDs. It felt heavy in a way that had nothing to do with its actual weight. There was something off about it, something ominous. Why would she have these hidden away like this? Cassie was always neat, always had a place for everything. For her to shove something into a corner like that out of sight, out of mind, it didn't sit right with me. I took the whole box downstairs to the living room, figuring I'd get to the bottom of this. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just old home videos or some forgotten work project. But if that were the case, why hide it? I slid the first disc into the DVD player, my heartbeat thrumming in my ears as the screen flickered to life. Static at first, then the camera focused on what looked like a hotel room, a nondescript, beige-walled place with the usual furniture you'd find in any cheap downtown motel. I leaned forward, my stomach doing somersaults. The camera shifted, capturing a woman entering the room. My blood ran cold. It was Cassie. Her face, her body, everything was unmistakable. But that wasn't the worst of it. A man followed her into the frame. A man I didn't recognize. I think, at that moment, my brain stopped working. The room felt like it was spinning, tilting. I couldn't process what I was seeing, couldn't make sense of it. There she was, my wife, laughing and kissing this stranger, pulling him onto the bed. The sounds of their laughter, the sight of her hands on him, the way they moved together, it hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just a one-time thing. The familiarity, the ease with which they undressed each other, this was practiced. This was routine. I felt sick. My hands flew to the eject button, yanking the disc out of the player as if that could erase what I'd just seen. But the box still sat there, staring at me, mocking me with its presence. One DVD after another, all of them unlabeled, all of them documenting Cassie's betrayal. How long had this been going on? There were easily 10 more discs in that box, each one a nail in the coffin of our marriage. I wanted to smash them, to burn the entire thing to ashes and pretend it never happened. But part of me, some masochistic, self-destructive part, needed to know the full extent of her deceit. I needed to see how far this had gone, to understand the woman I had shared a life with for nearly 10 years. I was shaking. My mind raced through memories, trying to pinpoint when this all started. Was it that weekend she went to the business conference? Or the nights she'd been working late at the office? Was this the guy I saw at the hotel, or were there others? I paced the room, my breath ragged. I kept glancing at the stack of DVDs, wondering if I had the strength to watch another one. Every fiber of my being told me to stop, but curiosity, no. More than that, desperation pushed me forward. I had to know. I grabbed another disc, slipped it in, and hit play. More of the same. Cassie, my wife, with another man. A different one this time. I stared at the screen, numb, watching as she kissed him, touched him in ways that were supposed to be reserved for us, for me. My skin crawled with disgust, but I couldn't look away. How had I been so blind? The memories hit me like a tsunami. Her growing detachment, the odd shifts in her behavior, the way she'd pull away when I tried to hold her. There had been signs, of course, but I hadn't wanted to see them. I'd buried my head in the sand, convinced myself that everything was fine. After all, we still had sex, we still went on date nights, right? But it wasn't the same. Not really. I thought back to that phone. The second one she had brushed off as a work device. Was it a burner? Something she used to coordinate these ... meetings? The realization gnawed at me, twisted my insides. Hours passed. At some point I had slumped onto the couch, the sun now setting behind me as I stared blankly at the TV screen. My mind was a fog, a whirlwind of rage, betrayal, and disbelief. My wife, the woman I had trusted with my life, my soul, had been living a double life for God knows how long. I didn't want to believe it, even though I had all the evidence right in front of me. I kept hoping that maybe there was some other explanation, some way to undo what I'd seen. But you can't unsee something like that. Once you know, you know. And there's no going back. I glanced at my phone. Cassie would be home soon. How the hell was I supposed to face her? My mind raced with possibilities. Confront her? Play it cool and act like I hadn't seen anything? I didn't know. I wasn't sure what to do, what to say. All I knew was that the life I thought I had was gone, shattered into a million pieces with those fucking DVDs. By the time I heard her keys jingling at the front door, I still hadn't come up with a plan. The door swung open, and there she was, smiling at me like nothing had changed, like she wasn't the woman I'd just watched betray me on a screen. I stared at her, barely able to keep it together, wondering how long she'd been living this lie, and whether she had any idea that her world was about to implode. Cassie stepped into the room, her smile as bright and practiced as ever, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I watched her closely as she put her purse down and kicked off her shoes, casual like it was just another day. Her eyes flicked over to me, and for a brief second, something in my expression must have unsettled her because the smile wavered. "Hey, you okay?" she asked, her voice as sweet and innocent as it had always been. For a moment, I couldn't answer. My mouth was dry, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. How could she stand there so normal, so completely oblivious while my whole world had come crashing down just a few hours ago? I forced myself to breathe. to keep from erupting on the spot. But it was hard. God, it was hard. Yeah, I managed, the lie bitter on my tongue. I'm fine. She walked over to the couch, plopping down next to me, her body close too close. I could smell her perfume, that familiar scent I had once loved but now made my stomach churn. She leaned her head against my shoulder, her hand sliding into mine, as if she hadn't been fucking another man just days ago. I nearly recoiled from her touch. What did you do today? She asked, oblivious. What did I do? I found out my wife was a lying, cheating piece of shit. That's what I did, Cassie. Just cleaned up a bit, I said, my voice hollow. I glanced toward the pile of DVDs sitting on the coffee table, my eyes narrowing. The box still sat there, glaring at me like a beacon of betrayal, and then, without even thinking, I said it. I found something. Cassie froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to catch it. Her hand tightened ever so slightly in mine before she pulled it back, a forced laugh escaping her lips. Oh, what did you find? I didn't say anything at first, just reached for one of the DVDs, holding it up between us like it was some kind of twisted trophy. Her eyes widened, and for the first time since she had walked in, I saw a crack in her composure. She stared at the disc, her breath catching in her throat. Roman, she began, her voice softer now, more tentative. What is that? I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The truth hung heavy between us, undeniable. Her eyes darted from the DVD back to me, searching my face for a sign maybe of how much I knew, maybe of how much damage she was about to face. I hit play. The screen flickered to life again, the same nondescript hotel room filling the screen, and there she was, Cassie, my wife, the woman who had sworn loyalty to me, undressing in front of some other man. The air in the room grew thick, suffocating. Cassie's face paled, and her hand flew to her mouth as she watched herself on screen, a look of sheer panic spreading across her features. For a while, neither of us said anything. The only sounds were the ones from the video, the unmistakable sounds of their betrayal playing out in brutal detail. I could see the horror in her eyes as she watched, her breathing shallow, her chest rising and falling rapidly. I can explain, she finally stammered, her voice trembling, barely more than a whisper. Explain? How the hell do you explain this? I felt a bitter laugh bubbling up in my throat but swallowed it down, my anger growing with every passing second. I clenched my jaw, keeping my gaze fixed on her as she floundered for words, for excuses, for anything that might save her from the reckoning I was about to unleash. Roman? Her words caught in her throat as she stared at the screen, horrified at seeing her own actions reflected back at her. It wasn't like that, I swear, she choked out, as if that would somehow make it better. It didn't mean anything. Nothing, I spat, my voice suddenly loud, angry. That's what you call nothing. Cassie recoiled at my tone, her eyes wide, pleading. Roman, I didn't. How long, Cassie? I cut her off, standing up now, the DVD case still clutched in my hand like a weapon. How fucking long have you been doing this? She opened her mouth, then closed it again, shaking her head. She was searching for something to say, for some magic words that might erase everything I'd seen. But there was nothing. She had nothing. Months, she finally whispered, her voice cracking. It had started months ago. But it wasn't serious. It was just, she trailed off, as if realizing how hollow her explanation sounded. Just what I snarled. Just some fun. Just a way to pass the time. Christ, Cassie, I thought you loved me. Tears welled up in her eyes. But I wasn't moved. I had seen too much, and her tears felt like just another manipulation. I do love you, Roman, I do. This was just, I don't know, You don't know, I was shouting now, my chest heaving with every breath. You don't know why you've been sneaking around behind my back. Fucking God knows how many men in hotel rooms. You don't know. I was trying to save our marriage, she yelled suddenly, the words bursting out of her like some twisted confession. I wasn't getting what I needed from you. Roman, it wasn't about love, it was just physical. I stared at her, stunned, as she continued, her voice rising in desperation. I know it was wrong, okay? I know that, but it was just sex. That's all it ever was. I thought if I could just get my needs met somewhere else, it would make things better between us. I didn't want to hurt you. I was trying to protect us. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She actually thought this was a justification, that somehow she had been doing this for us. I felt a wave of disgust wash over me as I stared at her. This woman I thought I had known, who was now a stranger sitting in front of me, spinning lies to try and justify the ugliest truth I had ever been forced to face. You were trying to protect us, I repeated, my voice dripping with venom, by screwing other men behind my back. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing now, her body shaking. I'm sorry, Roman, I'm so sorry. But I didn't feel anything anymore. The love I'd once had for her had been shattered by the images I couldn't get out of my head. I didn't care about her tears. I didn't care about her pathetic excuses. All I cared about was that my marriage was dead, and she had killed it. I grabbed the rest of the DVDs from the table, throwing them at her feet. These, I hissed, are what you've reduced us to. This is the legacy of our marriage. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away before she could touch me. Roman, please. "No," I said coldly. "We're done." And just like that, I walked out, leaving her sitting there in a pile of her own deceit, the echoes of her sobs following me out the door. The days that followed were a blur. I spent most of them locked away in my office, staring blankly at my computer screen, not able to focus on anything. Sleep came in short, restless bursts, haunted by images of those DVDs Cassie's lies were playing over and over in my mind like some cruel film turnoff. I couldn't go home, not yet. Not while the stench of her betrayal still clung to every corner of that house. I stayed with a friend, Dan, one of the few people who I trusted enough to tell. He didn't ask questions, just gave me a stiff drink and a place to crash. But the silence between us was thick, like he didn't know what to say. What could anyone say? Nothing would change what had happened. Cassie texted and called constantly, but I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to face her, not after what I had seen. She sent these pathetic messages, begging for forgiveness, claiming she'd do anything to fix it, as if there was anything left to fix. I deleted every one of them, wishing I could delete the memories of her as easily. But the more I sat in that silence, stewing in my rage, the more I realized that I couldn't just keep this to myself. No, Cassie had humiliated me in ways I couldn't even begin to describe, and she was going to feel that same humiliation tenfold. She needed to understand that actions have consequences, and I was going to make damn sure she did. It started small, just a casual mention to a coworker, dropping it into conversation with a neighbor. "Yeah, Cassie cheated on me," I'd say, watching their faces shift from shock to pity, and sometimes if they knew her disgust. The sympathy was nice, but it wasn't enough. I wanted more. I needed more. So I did what I never thought I'd do. I went public. First, I emailed close friends, people who had known us as a couple for years, laying out everything in raw, unfiltered detail. I told them about the DVDs, about her affairs, about her pathetic excuses. I didn't sugarcoat a thing. Then I hit send and waited for the ripple effect. The texts and calls started flooding in almost immediately. Friends, mutual acquaintances, all of them in varying stages of disbelief and outrage. Cassie had always been so charming, so polished, so good at playing the perfect wife. No one had seen this coming. But that wasn't enough either. I wanted the world to know what kind of person she really was. So I took it to social media. It was petty, sure, vindictive, absolutely. But I didn't care. I was beyond caring. I uploaded screenshots of our texts, her pathetic attempts to explain herself, and even hinted at the DVDs without actually sharing them. That was enough to light the fuse. People ate it up. Gossip, scandal, people love that shit. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Within hours, her phone must have been blowing up with calls and messages, just like mine had been. Friends we had shared for years dropped her like a bad habit. People stopped returning her calls, canceled plans, withdrew invitations. The walls were closing in on her, and I relished every second of it. But I wasn't done. There was still one more step. I couldn't keep this hidden from our families, not anymore, so I called her parents. Her father answered, his usual gruff voice laced with confusion as I explained calmly, methodically what his daughter had done. There was a long silence on the other end, and then, the cold truth sank in. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. "Neither do I said before hanging up. I wasn't finished yet. My parents, my siblings, her sister." I told them all, watching as the life she had built, the facade of a perfect wife, cracked, crumbled, and fell apart around her. It wasn't just friends or family. The small town we lived in wasn't known for its anonymity. The gossip spread like wildfire, faster than I could have anticipated. People whispered in grocery stores, coffee shops, and even at the gym where Cassie spent so much of her time perfecting the body she used to lure those men. Everyone knew. Everyone. Strangers looked at her with contempt, disgust. Some didn't even bother to hide their sneers when they saw her in public. I had taken away the thing she valued most, her image. And it felt good. No, it felt great. Cassie tried to play damage control, of course. She posted some vague apology on Facebook, rambling on about mistakes and mental health without ever actually admitting to what she'd done. It was weak. No one bought it. The comments section was a graveyard of brutal remarks, people tearing her apart, calling her out for her lies. One comment stuck with me more than the others: "Cheaters always get caught. You deserve this. I couldn't have said it better myself." But even as I watched her unravel in public, part of me still wasn't satisfied. I wanted to see it for myself. I wanted to confront her one last time, to look her in the eyes and see if there was any shred of the woman I had loved left behind the wreckage. So, I went home. When I opened the front door, the house was eerily quiet. Cassie was sitting on the couch, staring at her phone, her face pale and tear-streaked. She looked up when she saw me, her eyes widening in what I could only assume was relief. "Roman," she gasped, jumping to her feet. "Oh my God, I've been trying to reach you. We need to talk, we need to." I held up a hand, silencing her. "No," I said, my voice low but firm. "We're done talking." She flinched but didn't back down. "Please, Roman, I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But we can fix this. I swear, we can fix this." Her words were frantic, desperate. I walked past her, grabbing a glass from the kitchen and pouring myself some water. My hands were steady, my movements calm, even as my heart pounded in my chest. Fix what, Cassie? Our marriage? Or your reputation? I turned to face her, watching the guilt flicker in her eyes. She hesitated. Both, she whispered. I took a sip, the cool water doing nothing to quell the heat of my anger. There's nothing left to fix. You destroyed us, Cassie. You and your fucking excuses. Her lips trembled as she stepped closer, her hands reaching out as if to touch me, to close the distance between us. But I stepped back. I wasn't ready to let her in, not after everything she'd done. Roman, please? I can't lose you. You already have, I said coldly. You lost me the moment you decided to fuck around with those other men. Cassie crumpled, falling to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. It was a pathetic sight, but I didn't feel any sympathy. I had none left to give. I had emptied the well. I love you, she whimpered. I love you, Roman. Please don't leave me. I shook my head. You don't know what love is, Cassie. If you did, we wouldn't be here. Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't care anymore. I had gotten what I needed. The reckoning had come, and I was finally free. Without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving her alone in the empty shell of a life she had created. 3 years. That's how long it had been since I walked out of that house and out of Cassie's life for good. It felt like a lifetime ago, like a different world, like I was a different person. In some ways, I was. Everything had changed since then. In the immediate aftermath, I filed for divorce, of course. There was no dragging it out, no drawn-out legal battle. Cassie didn't fight me on it, she didn't have the strength. Once the town turned its back on her, once her family disowned her, she was a shell of the woman she used to be. The divorce went through quickly, almost quietly, like the final nail in the coffin of a marriage that had long since died. I moved on faster than I thought I would. At first, I felt like I'd never recover. How do you rebuild your life when you find out it was built on lies? But something inside me snapped after I exposed Cassie for what she was. I wasn't going to let her take any more of my life than she already had. I started focusing on myself, hit the gym, traveled, poured my energy into work. Eventually, I met someone new, someone who reminded me that love didn't have to be a battlefield. Her name was Julia, and she was everything Cassie wasn't: kind, honest, loyal. We married a year ago in a small, private ceremony. No drama, no secrets, just peace. A fresh start. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I was genuinely happy. Cassie, on the other hand, hadn't moved on. She couldn't. While I was busy rebuilding my life, she was trapped in the ruins of hers. Word spread quickly after I left her that day. The town didn't forget. They never do. Her job in marketing dried up. Who wanted to hire someone whose name had become synonymous with scandal? Our old friends, those who didn't cut her off, completely kept their distance, treating her like some kind of pariah. I heard whispers about her in those first few months. She tried to date again, apparently, but nothing stuck. No one wanted to touch her. Eventually, the weight of it all, the isolation, the shame became too much, and she started unraveling. I'd see her sometimes when I went into town, wandering the streets like a ghost. She looked thinner, frail even, her once perfectly styled hair hanging limp, her eyes hollow. The last I heard, she was seeing a therapist, but it wasn't enough. She couldn't accept what had happened, couldn't face the reality of the choices she'd made. In her mind, she was still clinging to the fantasy that we could somehow get back together, that everything could go back to the way it was. She would send me letters, handwritten, messy, full of rambling apologies and delusional plans for reconciliation. I never responded. I couldn't. But it wasn't until about a year after the divorce that I got the call. It was her sister, who I hadn't spoken to since everything went down. She sounded exhausted, worn down by the burden of it all. Roman, she said, her voice tight. I thought you should know. Cassie's not doing well. Apparently, she had spiraled into some kind of deep psychosis. The therapist recommended she be institutionalized after a breakdown where she had shown up at my old house, our house, banging on the door, demanding to be let in. The new owners had called the cops. That's when they realized how bad things had gotten. Cassie was placed in a psychiatric facility, where she's been ever since. Her sister told me that Cassie still believed she could fix things, that she could get me back. It was like she was trapped in a time loop, stuck in the moment before everything fell apart, refusing to face the reality of the situation. She would sit for hours in her room, talking about plans for the future, as if we were still together. She had constructed an entire fantasy world in her mind, one where I hadn't left, one where she hadn't destroyed everything. At first, I was angry. Even after everything, she still couldn't take responsibility, still couldn't admit to herself that she was the one who had ruined us. But that anger eventually faded, replaced by something else. Pity. Cassie had always been so concerned with appearances, with keeping up the facade of the perfect wife, the perfect life. But when that was taken from her, when the mask was ripped away, she didn't know who she was anymore. Without the lie, she had nothing. Her sister asked if I wanted to visit. I didn't. There was no point. The Cassie I had loved, if I ever really loved her, was gone. And there was nothing left for me in that institution. I couldn't save her, and I didn't want to. I had my own life now, my own happiness, and I wasn't about to jeopardize that by getting sucked back into her madness. The last thing I heard was that she had made no progress in therapy. She still refused to acknowledge the truth, still clung to the delusion that she could come home one day and find me waiting. The doctors didn't know if she would ever get better. She was lost, adrift in a sea of her own making, with no way out. I didn't think about her much after that. I had moved on, started fresh. My life was good. No, it was great. Julia and I were happy, and we didn't talk about the past. There was no need to. The past was dead and buried, and I had no interest in digging it up again. Sometimes, though, when the house is quiet and the nights are long, I think about that box of DVDs. I think about the man I was back then, the man who trusted too easily, who let love blind him to the truth. I think about Cassie, too, sitting in that sterile room, locked away in her own mind, forever waiting for a reconciliation that would never come. And in those moments, I feel a strange sense of peace. Not for what happened, but for what didn't. I had survived. I had escaped. And in the end, I got the one thing Cassie never would: freedom.